Judge sentences. Black woman to life. Has no idea. Her call will collapse the system. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. The gavel cracked like thunder across the silent courtroom, sealing the fate of Dr. Maya Ellison. Her expression didn't flinch. No tears, no shock, no outburst. Just a slow, steady exhale, as if she had expected this outcome all along. Judge Leonard Crane stared down from the bench, eyes cold and devoid of empathy. Dr. Ellison, you've been found guilty of trafficking and obstruction. Your education and credentials make your crimes all the more inexcusable. I sentence you to spend the remainder of your life behind bars. Gasps erupted from a few observers in the back, some too stunned to speak, others clutching their mouths in disbelief. Her friends, colleagues, and the few community members who knew Maya for her work in civil tech reform sat frozen. The courtroom guards closed in as the judge rose and disappeared behind the curtain. The bailiff approached her. "Let's go." But Maya didn't move. Instead, she turned her head and calmly said, "I need to make one phone call, right now." "Phone calls come later at the holding center." "I wasn't asking," she replied with a gaze that made the bailiff pause. Her tone was firm, too measured for someone just condemned to life in a maximum security prison. "I'm invoking Article 94. National Emergency Council. Check your manual." The bailiff blinked. His partner leaned in, unsure. "Is that even real?" Before they could argue, a suited man from the gallery, whom no one had noticed before, rose and flashed a badge. "Let her make the call," he said. "Who are you?" the bailiff asked. "Department of Justice. You'll want to cooperate." That's when the first seed of unease began to sprout among the court staff. Who exactly had they just sentenced? Maya stood, still cuffed, and was escorted to a side room. A rotary dial phone was placed in front of her. She picked up the receiver, dialed a number from memory, and waited. "This is Helix Protocol 9, she said. "Activate shadow order. Immediate review. Start with Judge Leonard Crane. Yes, I'm confirmed clearance level Indigo." And then she hung up. The phone call lasted 22 seconds, but its impact would be felt for years. 3 months earlier. The sun burned hot over Detroit as Maya Ellison stepped off a bus at West Grand Station with nothing but a canvas bag and a notebook. Her curly dark hair was tied back into a loose puff, and her outfit, khakis, a plain t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers, said nothing about the woman she truly was. She'd left behind her name, her reputation, her Harvard Law lectures, and her seat on the Federal Ethics Committee. All of it. Voluntarily. Now she was just Marie Ellis, a quiet paralegal volunteering at an overworked nonprofit called Liberty Now. She had one goal, to investigate what had happened to Marcus Bell, a 19-year-old black college student sentenced to 45 years for possessing less than an ounce of marijuana. His case wasn't unique, it was just the most recent. Over the next few weeks, Maya had quietly infiltrated local court proceedings, digital record systems, and police logs, taking notes, noticing patterns. One name kept coming up. Judge Leonard Crane. Crane had presided over 300 cases involving black defendants in the last 5 years. Over 280 of those resulted in maximum sentencing. His rulings often ignored defense pleas, rejected procedural objections, and in some instances cited outdated precedents. But what made her blood run cold wasn't just the numbers, it was the collusion. Emails she traced between Assistant District Attorney Ben Halbrook and lead narcotics officer Cole Ramirez painted a chilling picture. Certain individuals were being selected, targeted, and their cases fast-tracked into Crane's courtroom. And now Maya had made the mistake of getting too close. The traffic stop happened just outside of Greektown. "License and registration," Officer Ramirez had said, tapping on her window. Maya handed over the documents without a word. "You got any drugs in the car?" No, she replied calmly. Mind if we search your vehicle? Yes, I do mind. But they searched it anyway, and miraculously, or predictably, a duffel bag full of fentanyl turned up in her trunk. I've never seen that before, she said, staring at it with measured calm. Well, Ramirez smirked, you'll have time to think about it where you're going. Her court-appointed lawyer never showed. The judge, Crane himself, refused her request to represent herself. The prosecution presented grainy surveillance footage that proved nothing, and a witness whose story shifted with every telling. Still, Maya played along. She didn't fight every lie, didn't protest every unfair ruling. She watched, she noted, she waited. And when the sentence came down, she made her call. Back in the courthouse, Judge Crane returned to his chambers, smug and unbothered. He poured himself a scotch, adjusted his robe, and glanced at the headline on the legal brief on his desk. But something strange was happening. First, his assistant knocked. There's someone from the DOJ downstairs asking about your financial disclosures, sir. He frowned. Then came a second knock, this time a bailiff. Sir, Internal Affairs just subpoenaed all courtroom surveillance footage from last week. And, the governor's office left a message for you to return their call, immediately. Judge Crane's fingers tightened around his glass. Then finally the clerk entered, pale-faced. They're unsealing something, sir. A file. Maya Ellison. Not Marie, Dr. Maya Ellison. Former DOJ senior advisor, special counsel. Her credentials just hit the wire. Crane's eyes widened as the realization struck. He hadn't just sentenced another defendant. He had just tried to bury the woman the system feared the most. And she had pulled the first pin. Understood. Please give me a moment to write Chapter 2 of the story. Judge sentences black woman to life, has no idea her call will collapse the system. In full compliance with your instructions, I'll ensure the narrative remains seamless, emotionally engaging and plot-driven, with enhanced realism and twists. Reply coming up next. Judge Leonard Crane's heart raced as he reread the file for the 5th time, each line more damning than the last. Dr. Maya Ellison, former DOJ Special Counsel, Federal Ethics Committee, Harvard Law, clearance level indigo. He hadn't just sentenced a black woman with an Ivy League education. He had unknowingly placed himself at the center of a time bomb. Meanwhile, in the underground holding cell 2 floors beneath the courthouse, Maya sat alone in a cold steel chair, her wrists still cuffed, her expression unreadable. On the table before her sat a single folder, blank, untouched. Her eyes didn't move from the surveillance camera mounted in the corner. She knew they were watching. It didn't matter, because they were too late. 48 hours earlier. Maya sat in a cramped room inside Liberty Now, the nonprofit legal aid organization in downtown Detroit. The ceiling fan hummed softly overhead as she sifted through physical copies of past court transcripts and internal memos. She had already memorized the names. Leonard Crane, Ben Halbriuk, Cole Ramirez. Together, they had built a judicial machine that profited from conviction quotas, asset seizures, and privatized detention partnerships. The more convictions, the more money flowed to the county. And Crane had perfected the appearance of legitimacy, often boasting a record of clean rulings that made him untouchable. But Maya knew how the game worked. She had built the system once. Now she would use that knowledge to bring it down. Her phone buzzed. A message popped up from an encrypted app used only by members of a forgotten internal DOJ task force. Green light, you're clear to activate Phase 1. She locked her phone, stood and looked into the cracked mirror hanging behind the filing cabinet. No blazer, no badge, no entourage. Just a woman in jeans, a loose gray hoodie, and wireframe glasses. Exactly what they wanted her to be. Invisible. Later that night, Maya arrived at a community barbecue hosted by local activist group Northside Rising. The event was small, nothing flashy. Just fold-out chairs, aluminum trays of wings, and a circle of concerned Detroit residents who had seen too many of their children disappear into a system they couldn't fight. "I read about Marcus Bell," a man named Reggie said as he sipped his soda. "That boy's locked up for damn near life. And all for what?" "He's not the only one," Maya said quietly. Another woman leaned in. "You're that new paralegal, right, Marie?" Maya nodded. "Just trying to help where I can." They didn't know she was recording. Not because she didn't trust them, because she needed real, raw testimony for what was coming. Every voice that night added to a growing library of truth she was compiling. Stories of unlawful arrests, missing body cam footage, ignored pleas. "They're not just broken," she said later to herself as she walked home. "They're rigged." The next morning, Maya sat across from a former public defender named Sheila Denton. Sheila had retired early after being pressured to stop defending certain clients too aggressively. "What do you want from me?" Sheila asked, stirring her coffee. "Truth and documents." "I destroyed everything, Maya. I didn't ask for originals." "I need your memory." Sheila's eyes narrowed. "You're not a paralegal, are you?" "No." "Then who are you?" Maya hesitated, then said simply, "Someone who still believes the system can be held accountable, even if it collapses in the process." Sheila leaned back, studying her. "You're crazy." "Good. Then I'm on the right track." 3 days before her arrest, Maya returned to her tiny apartment to find it ransacked, drawers yanked out, her laptop missing, her backup drives gone. But the people who broke in hadn't found the notebook hidden behind the false panel in her bathroom. She opened it slowly. Page after page of handwritten notes, diagrams of court connections, police precinct corruption rings, and one name circled over and over again: Leonard Crane. At the center of it all. But Maya wasn't afraid. If anything, she was ahead of schedule. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "It's time for them to come for me," she said. And they did. Back in the holding cell, Maya was finally approached by a man in a tailored blue suit. He introduced himself as Gregory Shaw, a federal investigator sent in quietly by the Office of Special Counsel. "I had to see for myself," Shaw said, setting a thick folder on the table. "You left breadcrumbs. You picked them up?" "Every single one." Maya leaned back in her chair. "Then you know what has to happen. You want to expose them all. Crane, Ramirez, Halbrook. You're blowing up the entire county judiciary." "Not just expose," Maya said. "I want structural collapse. Every plea bargain, every conviction, reevaluated. And I want the DOJ to admit it knew and did nothing." Shaw paused. "That's asking a lot. Not a request." Gregory studied her, then gave a faint smile. "You realize what this will cost?" "I do," Maya said. "And if I told you they've already started spinning the narrative, that you're a rogue agent, that this is a vendetta, then let them. Because in exactly 21 hours my files go public. I already sent the final trigger." Shaw sat back, quietly stunned. "You're not bluffing." "No, I'm done waiting." The door opened and 2 U.S. Marshals stepped in. "Ma'am, you're being transferred to federal custody," one of them said. "Protective transport." Maya stood, and as she was led out, she looked directly into the courthouse security camera and whispered 2 words. "Watch this." The low hum of fluorescent lights filled the sterile hallway of the Harrison County Detention Center. The chill in the air wasn't just from the vents. It was the kind of cold that seeped from indifference and institutional power. Judge Howard Reese stood behind a one-way mirror, arms crossed, watching the woman he'd just sentenced to life sit motionless in a metal chair. Talia Jennings stared ahead, her hands resting in her lap, her face unreadable. She had been placed in an isolated observation room under the pretext of a mental health check, but everyone knew it was Reese's way of gloating. "Still think she's harmless?" Reese muttered half to himself. Beside him, District Attorney Carl Whitaker adjusted his tie. She didn't even flinch when the sentence was read. Most people break, not her. That smug confidence, she thinks she's smarter than us. Reese took a sip of his coffee and turned to leave. Let her sit in that room for a few more hours. Maybe it'll sink in. But what Reese and Whitaker didn't know was that across town gears had already begun turning. Talia's public defender, Marcus Dean, sat in the cramped back office of a non-profit legal organization. The cluttered desk in front of him was stacked with case files, but only one held his full attention: People versus Jennings. He clicked through a database of sealed court records. Something wasn't adding up. The evidence used to convict Talia had been flimsy: anonymous tip, questionable surveillance, and a mysteriously missing alibi witness. Yet the jury had been quick, almost eager to convict. Marcus leaned back, his mind racing. He'd seen railroads before, but this one felt personal. Meanwhile, back at the jail, a female guard entered Talia's observation room. Her name tag read Ramirez. She held a folder in her hand and kept her voice low. "You got 10 minutes. No cameras in here." She slid the folder onto the table and left without another word. Talia opened it, her fingers steady. Inside was a printed message. "Channel is open. Use the code." She swallowed hard. This was it. She leaned back, reached beneath the metal bench she was seated on, and felt for the magnetic tab she had discreetly planted the moment she entered the room. Her fingers gripped the burner phone taped beneath. In one motion, she had it powered on, decrypted, and dialing. A moment later, a voice crackled through. "Clear line. Speak. This is Jennings. Phase 1 is complete. Begin trace protocol on Reese and Whitaker. Start with asset transfers and private meetings from the past 18 months. Follow the money." Confirmed. External pressure? Minimal, but that won't last. Media will get the clip by morning. Get the footage ready. She ended the call just as the hallway door opened again. Another officer peeked inside. "You ready to be processed?" Talia stood, face neutral, phone slipped back into the underside of the bench. "I'm always ready." That night, the first crack in the facade formed. Marcus, now unable to sleep, revisited Talia's sealed juvenile record, something he'd been denied access to during the trial. But now, thanks to a backdoor tip from an anonymous hacker known only as Orion, the documents decrypted before his eyes. What he found wasn't a criminal history. It was a government record. Files stamped with Department of Justice, signed by military intelligence contacts, detailing Talia's involvement in covert legal work during her years at Yale and her recruitment into a federal oversight agency under a classified initiative. Her low-level government analyst label had been a decoy. Marcus exhaled slowly. She's not just a defendant, she's part of something big. Elsewhere, DA Carl Whitaker received an encrypted email from an address he didn't recognize. He opened it out of curiosity and nearly dropped his whiskey glass. The subject line: "Enjoy your new villa in Belize, signed, the taxpayers." Attached, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and surveillance photos of him meeting with two men known to be defense contractors. Men tied to falsifying lab results and tampering with digital surveillance systems, all tied to the Jennings case. His hands trembled, then his phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He let it ring. He was afraid to know who already knew. The next morning, Judge Reese sat at his usual bench, robe neat, gavel polished. The courtroom slowly filled. A junior clerk approached with wide eyes. "Judge, there's a situation, the video from the sentencing yesterday. It's trending, and—" He looked around, then leaned closer. "There are people from the DOJ here. They're sitting in the back row." Reese's grip on the bench tightened. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had begun to gather. Not protesting yet, just watching, waiting. A sea of phones, eyes, and silence. The system Talia had slipped into had no idea it had already begun to crack. And she wasn't even finished yet. The moment Judge Terrence Mullins stepped into the packed courtroom, the energy shifted. Journalists filled the back benches, legal observers lined the gallery, and even the court staff exchanged glances. They all knew today was different. What none of them knew was that the woman seated quietly at the defense table, hands folded in front of her, had the power to bring the entire system crashing down. Aubriana Cole wore a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly over her poised frame. Her hair was styled in a soft bun, minimal makeup, and a stare that revealed nothing. But inside, the storm was building. Across the courtroom, ADA Felicia Grant shuffled her notes, clearly preparing to reassert the state's position on why Aubriana belonged in prison for life. Mullins cleared his throat, flipping through the sentencing documents. "We're here to finalize the matter of the state of Georgia versus Aubriana Cole." His voice echoed off the polished wood and plaster. "Ms. Grant, is the prosecution ready?" Felicia stood, her tone sharp. "Yes, Your Honor, we are requesting the sentence of life without the possibility of parole, given the severity and nature of the offense." Aubriana said nothing. She'd been briefed by her attorney, a young, idealistic public defender named Mason Vega. But what they didn't know was that she had prepared a move no one in that room could predict. She hadn't called anyone since her arrest. She'd waited, chosen this exact moment, because the deeper the court pushed her down, the harder it would hit when she stood up. Judge Mullins adjusted his glasses, barely looking at her. "Ms. Cole, before I issue my ruling, do you have anything to say?" She stood slowly, steadying herself before walking to the podium. Her heels clicked softly on the courtroom floor, each step precise. She turned toward Mullins and then glanced back at the gallery. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." Mullins raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Her voice was calm, measured. "This court has decided who I am without ever truly seeing me. It has allowed bias and assumption to guide its process. But before you pass judgment, I would like to make a phone call." Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. Mullins frowned. "This is highly irregular, Miss Cole. This isn't. With all due respect, Your Honor, I am entitled to final remarks before sentencing. And my statement begins with a call." She held up a slip of paper with a number on it. "I request the court clerk dial this now. Put it on speaker." The judge stared at her. The room held its breath. The clerk looked at Mullins, who reluctantly nodded. The number was dialed. 3 rings. Then a voice answered, crisp, composed. "Office of the Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Special Assistant Martha Ellis speaking." Every head in the room turned. Aubriana didn't flinch. "Martha, this is Aubriana. Execute contingency Delta X immediately." There was a pause. Then, "Understood, ma'am. Protocol activated." And the line went dead. Mullins leaned forward, confused and irritated. "What the hell is going on here?" Aubriana turned to face the room. "My name is Aubriana Cole. I am not just the defendant in this case. I am also a federal investigator assigned to an ongoing corruption probe into racially biased sentencing in the Georgia judicial system." Gasps. Audible ones. Felicia Grant's jaw dropped. Judge Mullins went pale. One of the bailiffs took an involuntary step forward before catching himself. "You've all been part of the case, whether you knew it or not," Aubriana continued. "Your decisions, your conversations, your bosses, all monitored, recorded, documented." Mullins sputtered. "That's not possible. This is absurd." "I have the clearance, the credentials, and the authority," she said. "And now that I've been forced through every layer of this broken system, I'm finally in position to expose it." Behind her, Mason Vega slowly stood, whispering, "You're undercover?" She nodded once without looking back. "I needed to see it from the inside, and now the inside will be forced to see me." Outside the courtroom, black SUVs had begun pulling up. Federal agents moved silently into the building, down the hall, toward the very court that once tried to bury her. A bailiff's walkie crackled with instructions. Then came the rush. 2 U.S. Marshals entered the room and handed sealed envelopes to the judge and the prosecutor. Grant ripped hers open. Her face blanched as she read the heading. Notice of federal investigation and suspension pending review. Mullins tore his envelope with shaking hands. His expression crumbled. You're being investigated, Aubriana said evenly, for systemic bias, prosecutorial misconduct, and misuse of judicial authority. Silence swallowed the room again, but this time it was suffocating. Judge Mullins finally spoke, but his voice had lost its edge. This was never just about the case. No, she said, stepping down from the podium. This is about what happens when power is never questioned, until it's forced to face itself. The courtroom doors opened wider, flashbulbs went off, reporters jostled for space. A nearby camera caught the exact moment Mullins removed his robe, almost in a daze, and placed it gently on the bench. In that quiet surrender, the justice system felt the first tremor. Aubriana walked out, not as a victim, but as a force that could no longer be ignored. The FBI's entrance into the courthouse triggered more than headlines. It rattled an entire network of complicit silence. By noon, the district attorney's office was in damage control mode. By nightfall, every news outlet was leading with the same story: black woman sentenced to life exposes corrupt court system from within. But for Aubriana, it wasn't just about the headlines. It was about what came next. Back in her temporary safe house, a modest apartment prepped by federal handlers, she sat across from Special Agent Martha Ellis and Deputy Director Kent Wallace. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and toner, remnants of a long night of reports, timelines, and legal briefings. You just shook the system harder than anyone since the Church Commission, Wallace said, leaning forward. But now you've got a target on your back. Every bad cop, every compromised judge, every prosecutor who cut a deal, they'll be looking to discredit you. Or worse. Aubriana didn't flinch. Let them try. Martha gave her a look. Don't get reckless. The moment this becomes about ego, we lose control. You did the unthinkable. Now we need strategy. Aubriana nodded. Then let's give them a distraction. The plan was simple in theory, risky in execution. Create a second wave. The initial exposure had only scratched the surface. There were hundreds of cases, some minor, others life-destroying, that had been buried under the same machinery of bias. She needed to force the system to confront them all. Mason Vega, now in full defense attorney mode, joined them later that afternoon with a hard drive full of sealed affidavits and case transcripts. He was still trying to process that the woman he'd fought beside in court was, in fact, one of the people shaping federal policy behind the scenes. I feel like I should be angry, he said, but honestly, I'm just honored I wasn't completely useless. You weren't, Aubriana said sincerely. You were exactly the kind of lawyer this system needs. You believed me before anyone else even listened. He looked down, visibly moved, then cleared his throat. So what's the next step? She turned the laptop around. On the screen were names, dozens of them, people like her, people wrongfully sentenced, disproportionately punished, or coerced into plea deals under the same corrupt legal network. We file petitions, she said. We open every sealed folder. We give the press what they need to keep the spotlight on this. And we build a wall of truth they can't hide behind anymore. Mason blinked. That's going to make a lot of people very uncomfortable. Good, Aubriana said. But outside the room, things were already escalating. Judge Terrence Mullins, now suspended, had gone dark. His office was locked, his communications seized. But his allies, those who had benefited from his brand of justice, weren't going quietly. An anonymous source inside the DA's office leaked a report to a conservative tabloid, branding Aubriana a fraud, claiming her testimony was rehearsed, that she fabricated credentials. The backlash was immediate. Social media lit up with hashtags, some in support, others venomous. Cable networks brought in legal experts to dissect her past. One particularly venomous anchor from a national outlet declared, "This is a dangerous precedent. We cannot have covert operatives manipulating our courts." Aubriana watched it all unfold, jaw tight. "They're trying to flip the narrative," she told Martha. "Make it about me instead of the system." "We knew they would," Martha replied, "but they underestimated your reach." Aubriana opened her personal phone, a separate device no one knew she still had, and sent a text to a single name in the contact list. "It's time." An hour later, a bombshell interview dropped online. It was a sit-down she'd recorded 2 weeks before the arrest, when the investigation was still covert. In it, she outlined the web of corruption, the racial disparities, the judicial abuse. Names, dates, documents. By morning, it had 10 million views. Networks that once questioned her were now scrambling to book her. Civil rights groups organized rallies. Former defendants came forward, emboldened by her stand. But as the country roared in support, danger crept in from the shadows. That night, as Mason left a late meeting with Aubriana and headed to his car, a figure stepped from the alley behind the parking garage. A blunt object flashed in the dark. Mason barely dodged in time, catching a blow to the shoulder instead of the head. He stumbled back, fumbling for his keys, heart racing. The attacker vanished before security arrived. The message was clear. This wasn't just a war of ideas anymore. Back at the safe house, Mason sat with an ice pack on his arm, rage in his eyes. "They want us to be scared." Aubriana didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "We're getting close. That's why they're desperate." She picked up her folder, labeled Phase 3, and handed it to Martha. "I want subpoenas for the court clerks who altered transcripts. I want the police chiefs brought in. I want the judges' financial records examined for kickbacks." "You're building a case for collapse," Wallace said, stunned. "I'm building a case for reform," Aubriana corrected. "If it collapses along the way, so be it." The room fell silent. Then Martha smiled slowly. "Let's bring them down." Outside, rain pattered against the windows. The storm had only just begun. The silence in the federal war room was thicker than any courtroom Aubriana had ever stood in. On the central screen was a live-streamed protest outside the courthouse in Charleston. Signs read, "Justice for All" and "System on Trial." The crowd had swelled to thousands in under 6 hours, but inside the room the pressure was colder, more calculated. "We've traced the financial trails," Martha said, her voice low, measured. "It's worse than we thought. Mullins wasn't just biased, he was bought." Aubriana leaned in. "Who's paying him?" Kent Wallace stepped forward and clicked the remote. A network of shell companies popped up on the screen, all traced back to a lobbying group linked to private prison contracts. They funded campaign donations, speaking fees, even real estate. In exchange, he ensured longer sentences for people of color, more inmates, more profit. Aubriana stared at the map, her chest tightening. They were never just bad judges or bad cops. They were business partners. Mason muttered under his breath, "This is legal slavery." "And they've been running it under the banner of law and order," Aubriana added. Suddenly, the door opened. A young agent rushed in, holding a manila folder. "You need to see this," she said, handing it to Martha. Inside was a signed memo, dated 5 years earlier, from a former attorney general, green-lighting enhanced sentencing guidelines in high-risk communities. The wording was vague but damning. It implicitly encouraged harsher penalties in predominantly black neighborhoods. Martha looked up. "It's systemic." Aubriana stood, her voice razor-sharp. "Then we don't just expose individuals, we indict the policy." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "That's going to put us in direct conflict with the Justice Department." Aubriana didn't blink. "Good." They spent the next 12 hours drafting a comprehensive exposé backed by documents, testimonies, video evidence, and data analytics. Aubriana knew this wasn't just about her case anymore. It was about giving voice to every name that had been erased, every life shattered for profit. That night, the White House called. Deputy Chief of Staff Elena Granger asked for a secure briefing the next morning. "You're rattling the foundation," she said over the line. "If you're wrong, the fallout could be catastrophic." "And if I'm right?" Aubriana asked. Elena paused. "Then you've changed America." But not everyone welcomed the change. Judge Mullins, out on bail pending his own investigation, made a surprise appearance on a cable news show that night. Flanked by his lawyer, he painted himself as a victim of political retribution, claiming Aubriana manipulated the system for personal vengeance. "She's not who she says she is," he said. "And this so-called corruption, it's a witch hunt." The damage was limited. Aubriana's credibility was strong, but his words lit a fire among certain viewers. Overnight, threats began flooding her email. One warned her to drop it or disappear. Another referenced her old neighborhood in Atlanta. Aubriana sat in her dark kitchen, rereading the message. Then she closed the laptop, poured a glass of water, and walked to her window. Outside, she could hear chants still echoing from the protest downtown. Mason entered, seeing the tension on her face. "They're trying to make you scared," he said. "I am scared," she admitted, "but I'm still going." He nodded. "Then I am too." The next morning, Aubriana and her team walked into the Department of Justice, not as defendants or observers, but as whistleblowers. The hearing was private: 4 senators, 2 federal judges, and a team of internal investigators. Aubriana presented her findings with unflinching precision. For every claim, she had a document. For every accusation, a witness. And when asked why she didn't come forward sooner, she looked them dead in the eyes. "Because your system was designed to silence people like me." The room was still. One of the senators, an older man from Delaware, finally spoke. "Ms. Brooks, you've lit a fear we can't put out, but if we move forward with this, we're going to face hell. Are you ready for that?" Aubriana didn't hesitate. "I've already lived it." Outside the room, Martha clapped her on the shoulder. "You didn't just take the stand today. You took back the system." But the day's final surprise came after dusk. Back at her safe house, a package awaited on her doorstep. Inside was an unmarked flash drive and a typed note. "You're not the only one watching. Keep going." She plugged it into a secure laptop. It was a video from inside Judge Mullins's chambers. It showed him laughing with a police captain, discussing how to bury a case involving a young black man who had been brutalized in custody. It was everything. Aubriana's breath caught in her throat. She picked up her phone. "Martha, we have a bombshell." The courtroom was full but silent. Every eye was fixed on Judge Mullins, seated once again on the bench, but this time not as judge but as a man on trial. Aubriana stood across from him, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her posture calm, her presence commanding. Behind her, a team of federal investigators, legal aides, and journalists filled the gallery. Mason stood just behind her shoulder, a quiet pillar of strength. The prosecutor, this time someone else, had just played the flash drive video on the courtroom's main screen. Mullins' face, projected 20 feet wide, was caught on camera joking about getting rid of another one, referring to a suppressed police brutality case. Gasps echoed through the room. Even some of his former colleagues flinched. Mullins didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth was dry, his shoulders rigid, as if the very weight of his black robe still clung to him like a curse. The judge overseeing today's special tribunal, Judge Diana Feldman, turned to Aubriana. "Ms. Brooks, do you have a final statement before we recess?" Aubriana stepped forward. Her voice was low but carried through the chamber. "This isn't about one corrupt man. This is about a system that gave him the gavel in the first place, protected him, empowered him to destroy lives without fear of consequence. I sat in that defendant's chair, accused and silenced. Today I stand here with proof not only of his guilt, but of our power to take justice back." The courtroom stirred. "And make no mistake," she continued, locking eyes with Mullins, "this is only the beginning." After the session adjourned, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Flashbulbs exploded as Aubriana emerged, but she didn't stop to speak. Not yet. She had somewhere more important to go. At the small community center in North Charleston, her mother, Ruby Brooks, was hosting a legal literacy workshop. She had no idea her daughter would appear. As Aubriana walked in, Ruby paused mid-sentence, her eyes welling with tears. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "I wanted to tell them something myself," Aubriana said, smiling. She stepped up to the front of the room, facing a group of about 20. Young people, older residents, ex-offenders, single mothers. "Every one of you has been told you don't belong in the conversation about justice," she said, "but you do. You always have." One man raised his hand. "But what can we do? We don't have your power." "You have more than you think," Aubriana said. "You have your voice, your vote, your story. When we tell them, when we demand to be heard, we shift the ground." Back in Washington, behind closed doors, the Department of Justice met in emergency session. The case had now grown beyond Mullins. At least 12 other officials across 5 states were named in a sealed indictment. Names Aubriana had spent years gathering, names she'd feared might never see light. One of the younger agents, reviewing the scope of the charges, shook his head in disbelief. "This thing's not just going to shake up the courts. It's going to rewrite policy." Later that evening, as Aubriana returned to her townhouse, Mason was waiting on the steps. "They're pushing back," he said. "There's a motion from the bench union to challenge the tribunal's authority." Aubriana nodded. "I expected that." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a letter. It was from the National Bar Association. "They want to nominate you to the Ethics Reform Board." Aubriana raised an eyebrow. "They sure didn't want me there last year." "Last year they were protecting the system. This year they're trying to survive it." That night, Aubriana sat alone in her study, the flash drive still plugged into her laptop. She clicked through case files, dozens of names that still needed justice. A ping pulled her attention to a new email. From anonymous whistleblower. Subject, "You're not done. Follow the money." Attachment, case 1973R. Sentencing disparities. PDF. She stared at the peel. 1973R was a case name she hadn't heard in years, an old file from her law school days. It involved a young black man given a life sentence for drug possession, while his white co-defendant got 5 years of probation. The judge in that case? A then-rookie clerk named Harold Mullins. Her chest tightened. The roots were even deeper than she imagined. The next morning, as the sun cut through her blinds, Aubriana stood in front of a mirror, buttoning her suit jacket again. This wasn't over. Not yet. The day of reckoning arrived under a blanket of gray clouds. Inside the federal courthouse in Washington, the atmosphere was electric, buzzing with reporters, legal watchdogs, and justice reform advocates. Every seat was filled, every aisle crowded. The case that had started with a wrongful sentence had ballooned into a national scandal that touched the highest rungs of the judiciary. Aubriana Brooks stood quietly at the edge of the courtroom, reviewing her final notes. Her presence no longer needed explanation. People knew her name now. They knew her story. And more importantly, they knew what she stood for. The special hearing was called not just to finalize Judge Mullins' sentencing, but to announce systemic reforms. Aubriana had worked closely with the Department of Justice to draft the proposal: new judicial review standards, mandatory sentencing audits, and whistleblower protection protocols. But she hadn't come just for the policy. She came for closure. Judge Diana Feldman entered the courtroom and nodded toward Aubriana. "Ms. Brooks, Would you like to say a few words before we move forward? Aubriana rose and walked to the center. She didn't need her notes. I've learned that justice isn't just about the verdict. It's about what happens after, about whether we change the systems that failed us in the first place. She paused, eyes scanning the room. Judge Mullins sentenced me to life without parole, but today I'm here to make sure no one else has to go through what I did. This isn't vengeance. It's restoration. Mullins, seated just feet away in an orange jumpsuit, couldn't meet her eyes. Accountability isn't cruelty, she said. It's a promise. To the innocent, to the voiceless, to the future. As the room held its breath, Judge Feldman banged the gavel once. Let the record reflect that Harold Mullins is hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without eligibility for parole. Furthermore, his judicial pension is revoked, and he is permanently barred from any legal practice. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some clapped quietly, others simply nodded. Later that day, Aubriana held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed her, shouting over one another. Ms. Brooks, how does it feel? What's next for you? Will you run for office? She lifted her hand gently and smiled. Justice isn't a position, it's a mission, and I'm not done. The next week, national news channels aired a documentary-style feature titled Brooks vs. The Bench, chronicling her fight, the reforms, and the fallout. Interviews with victims of Mullins's past rulings began to surface, giving long-silenced voices a national platform. But the most powerful moment came in a live broadcast when Aubriana appeared on a town hall panel hosted by PBS. A young law student in the audience asked her, "What would you say to someone who thinks they're too small to fight back?" Aubriana didn't hesitate. I was that person, alone, broke, wrongly accused. But when you stand in your truth, even when it shakes, you find people who will stand with you. Courage doesn't start big. It grows when you decide to speak, even when your voice trembles. She paused and added with a smile, and sometimes one trembling voice can bring down an empire. Back home that night, Aubriana returned to the small office above her mother's garage, now the headquarters of her nonprofit, the Brooks Justice Initiative. Its mission: to expose judicial corruption, support victims, and provide legal aid to those wrongfully sentenced. On the wall was a framed copy of her original sentencing document, marked in red. Vacated. Mason walked in, carrying takeout and a stack of new case files. 10 more letters came in today, he said. People asking for help. Aubriana took the files, flipping through them slowly. Her eyes lingered on one, a teenage boy sentenced for a petty theft, whose judge had ties to Mullins's political circle. She looked up. Let's get to work. And to everyone watching, listening, following her journey, this is the part where we say the system may bend people, but it doesn't break the truth. Not when people like Aubriana rise. If this story moved you, if it lit something in you, don't let it end here. Share it, speak it, stand for it. Subscribe for more true justice stories that challenge, inspire, and empower. Justice starts with one voice, maybe yours.